Starting the land trust in Oakland was really important at the time that we launched it. It was at the height of the foreclosure crisis, which was why those NSP dollars were available for us. And I think that was a period of time where the distinction between those with resources and those with fewer resources, I think, is always pretty clear in Oakland, but somehow the geography of that was extra clear during that time. And how visible it was to demonstrate the success of folks who lived above the 580 freeway, above MacArthur Boulevard, who were by and large riding out the foreclosure crisis okay, well, as opposed to the numbers that we saw in the flatlands and how many families were decimated by that experience, how many homes were vacant.
There were over 13,000 foreclosures in the span of about 3.5 years, and that was equated to 1 in 5 owner-occupied homes in the city. And like you're saying, I mean, that was all in the flatlands of Oakland, and incredibly uneven distribution of where those foreclosures occurred. And I think in that context, the concept of a land trust where a community can gain control over land and housing, I mean, there really doesn't need to be much more case making at that point, I think, even though, I mean, we obviously did, but that is like an incredible backdrop for creating a different path forward. The
process of building trust for the land trust, I think in many ways, that trust wasn't built during the time that I was with the land trust. Started perhaps, but I would say that in many ways, you were the one who cultivated that more. And I think part of that was just time. It just took a lot of time. We also had challenges in working with the city and their ability to design a funding program that could get the funds to us so that we could do what we said we were going to do. And I think for those early years where there was skepticism about the model, the fact that we were working in an environment and an ecosystem that wasn't either interested in or equipped to support the development of the product of what we were seeking to create helped undermine the trust that we were trying to build.
Well, it strikes me that the kind of the political case making too, and or building really the organizing work that ACORN and ACE has done to really demand this as a solution. And that's certainly, I think that was a key part of the NSP funds being allocated to the land trust, if I recall. Of just that sort of, I mean, people showing up at city council and demanding that this happen. And I think that's just been a huge part of the continual case making and building some political power around this as a strategy.
Whatever that daily work has been, the fact that we've had the consistent believers in the organizing front who are really moving this work, as well as the momentum that's been built with the city council, I think has been really important, as well as I think the fact that once we finally got our houses occupied, that things have been quiet. Things are quiet because things have been going well. And I think in many ways folks were waiting to demonstrate that things wouldn't go well, and things have just quietly gone well in terms of like bringing in the homeowners and folks being successful as homeowners in that space. I also think, though, that the work that you're doing now with other community land trusts is helpful in terms of just creating some shared platforms for some of that work. I think the other thing that I think about is the narrative around community land trusts, the narrative around why you buy a house, and how some of that existing narrative makes thinking about a community land trust property more challenging. You know, for folks who have been able to buy a house and then see huge increase in the value over a short period of time, and how much that that narrative is dominating folks' understanding of why it is that you might buy a house.
So for the recent growth of the land trust, one of the most important things that has happened has been a new local public source of funding that came through a bond measure, an infrastructure bond that included $100 million for anti-displacement housing programs. And that came about right as the land trust was starting to do housing preservation work. So it just, I think it's hard to underestimate how important having a public commitment to any program like this, but particularly preventing displacement of folks where they're at, and using the land trust as a strategy to do that. So having that source of public funding, I mean, we're still using that source and looking forward to a new bond measure that will hopefully replicate or recapitalize a program so that we can continue the work.
It makes me smile, just because when I think about the process with Measure KK, I think there's still a little bit of what happened with NSP as well, like the sense of like folks who are providing the more traditional affordable housing resources. There's a little bit of negotiating for who gets access to those dollars. But I just really appreciate that this time around there was considerably more collaboration than what we experienced with the NSP dollars. So to me that indicates that the land trust, I mean, and it's clear, the land trust has really gained a different foothold in Oakland, has established some significant respect within the field, within the city as well.
We analyzed just the housing stock in Oakland and found that 88% of people in Oakland live in buildings with less than 25 units.
Wow.
And when you look at the affordable housing industry, there is virtually no capacity to deal with existing buildings of that scale. And so I think there's an incredible void and just like no attention to that typology of housing stock, and so therefore, you know, thousands and thousands of families that may be at risk of displacement with no resources, no viable alternative in terms of preservation as a strategy.
How important it is to have these tools, these housing tools that are targeted, specifically targeted, where it's most critical. And that statistic right there, I think, really shows how important the community land trusts and others that are similar, how critical they are, especially in a city that is losing its Black and brown population at such a high rate. Yeah. And I think also related to that, though, is not only just that folks are leaving, but that the message that we get is one that devalues Black and brown people. And so I think the important critical aspects of a community land trust is that it is about agency. It is about building power. It is about having control over your life. And how important that is right now in Oakland, where that conversation isn't happening enough, though we're definitely seeing the results of that shift in power.
At OakCLT, we've been really excited about the growth of CLTs in California in particular, and really coming out of community in kind of a different way. And so there's 10 or 12 new CLTs that have popped up in California over the past 3 or 4 years. So seeing that, I mean, that's one element of scale. It's sort of the horizontal scale
Right.
of CLTs and more communities adopting it as a strategy. And what my former colleague, Zach Murray, it's really not about this sort of traditional notion of scaling number of units. It's about scaling community control.
Right.
And so kind of shifting that perspective on what scale actually means. But I do think we definitely still have work to do in terms of when you look at how affordable housing is funded in this country, there are no national programs that directly support community control of land, community land trusts, housing cooperatives. So I think, there's that bottom-up energy and new CLTs starting all the time. I'm concerned that there's not going to be enough support for those organizations to do the work that they're committed to doing.
Just thinking about sustainability and making sure that there are long-term solutions so that the smaller organizations that are springing up now have a long-term funding opportunity. But I think this also contributes, this is a whole bigger picture conversation. This is a conversation that needs to happen at so many different funding levels, making sure that those critical national funders are participating at the philanthropic level in these conversations.
Something that's also been important for our work in Oakland, and particularly through Spark and our local Oakland Preservation Table and Bay Area for All, has been just the fact of having an assemblage of other organizations besides the Community Land Trust, kind of starting to elevate the model and reflect the goals of the work in different spaces.
Yeah, and I also think about Bay Area for All as being like reflective of Oakland, and the combination of organizations that are part of that table that are that reflect some of the important elements too, and the things that we're thinking about all the time when we think about why we need to continue with a community land trust and promote a community land trust. When I was involved in the land trust as an ED, and when things were hard, because a lot of it was really hard. Yeah. I think the thing that made it worthwhile was just how important it felt to be doing this work, and to be doing this work in Oakland, in a place that I really cared about so much, where, it's not where I'm from, but it's where I choose to be, and I will continue to live here and to do everything that I can to promote the best of Oakland. And in many ways, I felt like what we have been doing with the Land Trust is reflective of that. It is kind of the best of Oakland. It is it's the return to the people and the kind of the historical Oakland love that sometimes gets forgotten in the newer glitz and glam that happens with Oakland. I don't know. What keeps you doing this work at this point?
For me, it was just made such a clear connection to the Community Land Trust as a vehicle for Oakland to gain control of itself, and not Wall Street hedge funds and these outsider investors owning the flatlands of Oakland. We have tools to reverse that, and so that Oakland can own Oakland, and do it in community together.